God.
Hello. You may be asking, what am I doing with this piece of cardboard?
What are you doing with that piece of cardboard?
What I'm doing with this piece of cardboard is making a template for this inside of the floor pan tunnel. I got this all lined up. It's pretty darn close now. I centered it. I did a little shifting, a little arranging. I cleaned up all these edges, got all the tar board and paint off, ready for welding. I did some research on how people are doing this in their cars. I've seen a number of them. It looks like they raised the torsion housing maybe 3 or 4 inches, and they cut it back here. So the transmission nose cone, etc., was exposed way above all this. And that's cool. Their cars were probably in much better shape than this. So I made the cuts right through the really rusty areas. Instead of trying to salvage any of that stuff, it's all got to get rebuilt. So if this did have solid floors, I probably would have looked at it a bit differently. And I definitely see the benefit of cutting through here and leaving this low because the majority of these tubes, etc., do stay in place. What I was thinking, though, is the fact that these tubes come through in perfect orientation to the transmission, to the accelerator cable, through the fan shroud and the fuel line. I like this plan for this application. Hence, my template with the window. So you'll see, flat piece of steel will come right through here like such, allowing the shifter rod, clutch, fuel, and accelerator cable to poke through that window. Make sense?
I like it.
I like it too. What this is going to do is just set up for the structure that needs to happen with the rest of this tunnel. There's going to have to be bracing coming up from the bottom, triangulating up to that area. And then the way that I cut this top cap will be reinstalled here, so it looks fairly stock, just taller from the shifter rearward, from the inside, allowing these cables to simply get reconnected, or the tubes and cables to go right through that window in this plate. Make sense? Makes sense to me. Again, just thinking. So I came up with a representation. This is like the 4th incarnation of this template. That's why it looks so clean. But I put a little center notch. I measured out. I got a chalk mark here. And then I established a center of this. I squared it, put a little level with the ruler on it. So yeah, these guys are darn close. It's a little bit low right now, but that's cool. What I have is this mark here. And then these simply need to be plumb. They need to be perfectly vertical on the edges, at which point I can take this, raise it right up to meet, and tack weld it. This pan, I don't know if it's pretty thin walled. Maybe it's 18, 16 gauge, I don't know. I use 20 gauge a lot in the sheet metal. And this is reasonably thick. It looks a little thicker because it's got some burr from the grinder, but I felt with that thickness of the pan, this vertical piece could be 1/4 inch because it's not wholly supporting the car in that this twist that it would want from the weight and the motion of the vehicle bouncing. It's not going to buckle this because you have this other massive structure coming out and then gussets on the underside. So this is more of a locator plate to keep it all in position as we build the structure back. I've been thinking. Made that run down to the steel supply. They sell a 12-inch by 12-inch for like $10. So my materials yesterday were $42.
That's awesome.
Because again, going from the remnants pile, this is the top of the pan here. And I found this, which is 1/4 inch as well. So someone had ordered this 10-inch by 3-inch C-channel to be bent. This isn't like a stock off-the-shelf C-channel. They're a bit different. This was put in a brake and made. So yeah, I just walked up onto this. And I'm like, man.
That's a good find in the steel store.
Yeah, this was custom fabricated and somebody didn't pick it up. So he gave it to me for scrap price.
Wow.
So maybe instead of just utilizing this, maybe I'm just gonna pull this shifter plate out, build the tunnel back with this 1/4 inch, you know, narrow it and fit it together so that that ain't going nowhere. That's like Baja race car strong, I think. So yeah, I'm using it. It's less expensive. It's a little more weight in the car. It'll keep it low like we want. I'm gonna build it out of this. It's not gonna fail, ever. I'm gonna use the plasma cutter on this next portion because I don't use it a lot. People have asked me, why don't you use it a lot? It's kind of like a luxury. And I try to keep myself, you know, hardened, street cred tough. Also, I like using the disc because one cut through and you're ready to weld. Plasma cutter leaves a little slag. There's a chance for wiggle woggle in your shape cutting. So I'm gonna cut this window with the plasma cutter just to make everybody happy. Show that I got one.
And you know how to use it.
I've got one and I know how to use it. It's as easy as pressing a button. I already set this up, but the chalk came off a little bit. Just gonna reestablish the cut. I like to use white chalk when I'm using the plasma because I typically use a welding hood. You can use glasses on this, dark ones, but again, I try to keep things simple. I use a welding hood. It's that easy. We're gonna make a window that big. I put a little drill hole in there because it helps for the cutter. It helps for the cutter to pierce it. You can just pierce straight through, but it usually blasts a little bit of a liquid hot metal out of the hole. So that's just a tidier way to approach it. Click this baby on. These things are reasonably expensive. They do great work. I'm not disputing that. It's just, for me, it's kind of a luxury. This works a bit like a welder. This works a bit like a welder in that it's an electrical circuit, so you have your ground clamp. Electricity comes flying out of one of those things with air pressure and whoosh, burns a hole in it. So instead of welding, where it's adding metal, this one is purely blowing the metal away with compressed air. I've also used nitrogen. It lasts a bit longer on the tips because there's no water. You always get water in your air compressor if you don't have a dryer. But this particular model, the Lincoln, the trigger turns it on and then you have to trigger it off too. So I have it set almost to the max. So you just hold it. Then you turn the air off by pressing it again. And the air is cooling it. You shut it off. Real straightforward. So this to me reminds me a lot of when I used to do tattooing, because it's like every bit counts. If you do that, you're cutting that. So it's just like with tattooing, if you do that, you got a big line going in the wrong direction. So you could use templates, or a lot of times I'll just bridge like this, like you see me welding, and I'll just use my hands together, create a nice even cut. Again, I keep the shade turned down on this, or turned up, whatever it is, so it's not super dark, so I can see what I'm doing. So see how there's always just that little bit of jaggedness in the plasma cutting? If I use a tool, it doesn't have that. So I'm gonna have to take the little burr grinder and set that up. If this was, a straight template where I could just ride around it, would be pretty perfect, but that's what you get with a freehand cut in this shop.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is.
I want to try it once.
So it's that simple. I'll let that cool off for a second, and I'm gonna plug my welder in. I gotta turn off the fuse box, so as I mentioned, I just clean up the cut a little bit with one of these. The plasma cutter produces a little bit of slag. You might see some on the bottom side. Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. With the grinder, you just get this little like razor sharp foil, but with the plasma cutter and the torch, you always get that slag coming off the backside. Quick little cleanup, back in action. Now, ready to direct you over to the car. In the other episode, I trimmed out about a 1/4-inch gap in here. It's not just a perfect straight shot. I did open that up enough to handle this plate. So I have a center mark inside it. I'm just gonna weld the center mark, and then I'm gonna get my level and tip this so that it's very upright. Cool. It's a neat little level on this square, so let's put that up against it. I'll level it up right about there. All right, so that'll lock that. And now you can see that this pan is a little bit low. So I'm gonna bring the jack and raise her up just a touch.
Boy, this table really does make a difference.
Oh, I love this. I've never had a table like this.
This
and
is really cool.
I've always dreamed of it. It literally is an operating table. So instead of thrashing around on the floor,
right.
you got good measurements off of every frame rail to come up, to reach in, out, clean it as you're working. It's just
yeah, no, I see with your back already, I can tell. Even
right.
me filming, it's nice to just stand here.
All right, so I'm going to start with this jack and just raise up that nose of the thing for the thing right there. I'm going to bring up the rear a little bit. All right, got the engine hitting the body a little bit. Yeah. So again, I know that we wanted to raise the suspension 6 inches, so it just so happens that the pan opening is 6 inches, roughly. So from the bottom of this to the top of the plate, that's 12. Yeah, so I'm gonna put a clamp in here and draw that together. Keep this centered. Pull that in. You mark the center of this while I still have it. There. Center of this. It's 3. So yeah, look, it's right on the mark. Perfect. That worked out well. Draw this together. Then we're going to work on making sure suspension is equidistant from the table. I like that use of big word.
So I have a question.
Yes, nurse.
So you have to do all this interior modification before you can actually go cutting more of the Volkswagen. Like when you do a custom, do you start from like the inside out as far as cutting and lowering and stuff like that?
I like to, because rim and tire combo on a lowered car, the diameter and the width typically gets in the way of your fenders, inner fender wells, etc.
Mhm.
So like this, I like to gut it, get a lot of stuff out of the way. If you're Zing the rear of a traditional hot rod style thing, you're coming way up in the floor just like this with a different arrangement of frame rails, and same thing, you're changing out the front suspension. You gotta, I just like to get the cars rolling as low as possible to start with.
Right, and then you can go from there.
Then you can do anything.
Well, because I would think if you chop or like do stuff outside, then all of this would be a lot harder to do.
Well, the more finished anything is outside. I mean, we could have chopped the top before doing this, but it would be more cramped inside. We could have left the windows in. It would be smoky in here. I mean,
Right.
just thinking ahead.
Okay. Just an observation.
Excellent observation. So I'm going to loosen this up a little bit because we talked about a root gap in some of the other projects.
Yep.
So note, leaving a little gap right there. I'm going to put a good hot tack right on that mark. Keep it centered. So now what we have is basically a triangulation. So the bottom is locked vertical, and that center one will keep this thing kind of stuck in place. And now if I got to wiggle jiggle the back end of this, that's going to be okay. Prepare for the wiggle jiggle.
Preparing.
Just doing some quick measurements off of the body sheet metal because there's not a lot to measure to at this point. So just putting a flat ruler off of this perch that we're going to ultimately build off of, coming out to the sheet metal to the hole, 5 3/4, 5 5/8. Let's check it on this side. So it's just about the same. Yeah, 5 5/8. I mean, it could be the body. See, it's still flexible, but I'm cool with that. It's within, 1/16 of an inch. So that being said, we're going to check to see if it's, right now we know that side to side it's reasonable, but we're going to see if it's doing that. So we'll measure up off the base plate, the table, onto one of the body mounts, see where we're at there. Coming in here, you'll see this other area. That's another good solid reference point because the body bolts onto there. So measuring up off the table, I got 21.5, perfect right to that level. And on this side, 21 5/8. So that's telling me that side got to come up a little bit. I'll just level it out just a hair. I got all kinds of devices and ideas for doing this type of thing. So, I mean, we're 1/8 of an inch off, so that means 1/16 up over here will bring that down to 1/16, and that's the middle of that equation. So to do that, I'm gonna try to just put a little shimmer right, so you got that amount of wiggle right there. Just put a flat bar in there. See if that don't fix it. So we do that. Push that in. Getting close. We'll do that. Then we'll do that. So this is a wedge. It's got a little bit of a bevel to it. Let's measure that. I bet that moved to the 16th. Yeah. 21 5/8 right there. One 5/8. It's just that little bit of persuasion. So I'm happy with that. I'm gonna burn some welds. Again, tack, 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 tack. Just kind of fill it in. I'll lower the voltage a little bit on this. Put my glove on. So again, I use the term tack, but you hear I'm putting the heat into that thing, pushing that metal into place. This being a frame, you want that good, hot, consistent weld all the way around. Manipulate a little sheet metal here. Oops. Nothing touches the floor. Even when it touches the floor, it's only for a brief moment. All right, now I'm gonna lay into this with some welds. I'm stuck. Yeah, got a little rust, a little corrosion in the bottom corner, but that's cool. We'll work around that.
Smells like incense.
German cars have an interesting smell, especially the headliners. So this is, when I said tar board, it's literally tar. So that's part of what you're smelling.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I used to do flat roofing, hot tar, hot mop roofing, and there was pitch tar, and you would get like pitch burn. It was the worst skin condition like I've ever had. It's like a sunburn, but it's a chemical burn from pitch tar dust.
Ouch.
So you're smelling a little bit of that essence, but there's not a lot of dust, so we're cool. I'm not 100% sure if that's pitch tar, but look, see, it cracks apart. So when you're ripping up a roof, it looks a lot like this, but there's tons of dust. Yeah, if you remember where those two tubes pierced that I cut through, that's what holding me up a little bit on this weld. It's a little corroded around there, but we got it. And there's different styles of welding, vertical up or vertical down. There's a little gap in this that I was filling, so I was going vertical down. In other words, I was holding the torch facing upward and filling it in. Whereas like with arc welding, a lot of times you'll do the opposite. You'll stitch it from the bottom and go right up. So end result is still a pretty good bead. See the heat affected zone. A lot of heat in there. It's not the prettiest, but that's under the floor. Dealing with a little corrosion, etc. So that's what we got. Again, same thing here, just a little bit of a gap, so I'm filling it in. Yeah, a little bit of the old rusty crusty. Around. Alright, so that plate is totally grabbed on there. Very hot, as evidenced by the smoldering smoke of smokeness.
I won't touch it.
Please do not touch the merchandise. All right, so now I'm going to look at the orientation of what? The angle of the floor here versus the angle of this. Because we don't want it pitching up or down. We want it approximately the same. You get my little bubble level on there. I say this now because now that that is secure, the ability for that to twist is almost nothing. So if we got to raise it or lower a little bit, that plate will flex because it's only a 1/4 inch and it's quite hot right now. Find my level. It's a rough idea. Oops, take this off. I do have one of those little things with the arrow on it. I might have to resort to that. But so this bubble is pretty much to the little, there's lines on this, so it's to the second line here. So that back can come up just a hair, or I could lower the nose a little bit. I'm gonna lower the nose a little bit. When I say the nose, I mean the front jack. See if that don't push it down. Nope, that didn't do a thing. I'm gonna hit that floor jack in the back just a touch. Oh yeah, that totally did it. I saw it come up. Nope. Drop it down a little bit. When I dropped the first floor jack, it did a little bit. They do this a lot with Baja bugs, especially if there's a V8 in the back. They could raise up that engine in the rear just a hair. Sometimes you'll see like a race car with the engine kind of jacked up for more ground clearance. But what we're doing, we'll just keep it flat. Yeah, there it is. Exactly the same. Sweet. So that's good. I'm going to make a cross brace, and then we're out for this episode. There's going to be a lot more thought gone into the plumbing of these tubes, but I do want to make sure that jack doesn't lose a little bit of hydraulic pressure and this starts to move out. So I pre-cut a couple things. I'll show you here. I'm going to use these tabs for body mount structure support. I just have 2 bolts that happen to fit the threads here. They won't be the final in the end. But these flat perches I mentioned, you got 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to be a really solid rear mount for what we're building. I'm going to set that in place. get that flat with the torsion housing perch thing. Just, yeah, get that flat. Kind of, yeah. Do the same on the other side. And the same thing. Nice flat spot. Set this tab in place. Finger tighten it down a bit. Come on. With so much of the stuff that I build, I just use the hardware I have laying around. And then in the end, I'll say, okay, well, I need this M14 or M12 metric thread and this length, and go to the hardware store. But these are good temporary holders. Yeah, cool. So that's that. And I measured earlier a piece of round tube. 1-inch round, 16 gauge wall. Am I coming in clear?
Yes, darling.
I can see you from here. So look, it's gonna fit just like magic. Magic.
Wow.
That's that ruler thing again. I'm starting to use that regularly. Can you dig it? It's gonna get welded here and there. That mounts the body to the chassis.
Ah, that was my question. What does that do?
What it does is it mounts the body to the chassis. Mounts the body to the chassis. That's another thing about a great table like this. You can hop in, out, under, all the things. Ooh, hear that? It's the sound of my kneecap being spiked by a piece of steel. All right. Now, as all the great welders of the world will say, as upon completing their task, that ain't going nowhere. It's a good start. I'm going to do some thinking, some configuring. So what we've established is this raised torsion housing is locked. Can't rotate. It's not going front to back. The body is not going to sway side to side. And we have a surface now to begin building the new floor section back in and the fenders back in. So that's where we're at. I think next time we're going to accomplish getting all this stuff put back together, all the tubes, and then we'll cap this. So we'll have shifter, clutch, brake, accelerator, all the things. I also like keeping the format into smaller segments like this, because if you get bored, instead of scrolling through all that footage, you just click the next video and boom, it's done.
Mm-hmm.
See you next time.